Hello, and welcome to episode 37 of Trails in the Pod. I'm Colin. That's Kevin.
I'm not Kevin.
And who are you?
I'm a hard-bitten, stoic, grim-faced general in a 1980s, 1990s action film.
What the fuck, Kevin?
I make the difficult, hard choices that the plucky protagonist cannot and will not.
I'm flabbergasted. I'm truly flabbergasted at this cold open.
Difficult choices, hard decisions, because we are all about what's not easy on this episode of this podcast.
Yes, today we are speaking difficulty in video games. And two things kind of spark our decision to revisit this topic. We've touched on it briefly here and there in other episodes, but as listeners know, I'm playing through Trails of the Sky the Third on hard, and it's a different experience for me, and I think that's quite interesting. And also, Kevin and I are mutually playing through Fire Emblem, Path of Radiance. And Kevin, I think, is finding that it's a bit harder than he had thought, and it kind of changes how you interact with the game. So we wanted to explore difficulty in general, how it changes how we interface with the games, what's good, what's bad. Should games always make themselves more difficult or easier? Things like this.
Colin, I put an hour, maybe two, into Fire Emblem Three Houses. You know that.
Yeah, only a couple of hours into Three Houses.
And so my strategy is often Leroy Jenkinsing maps. But I cannot do that in Path of Radiance.
No, you cannot.
Huge paradigm shift. And I found it it's incredibly difficult and challenging. And I think there's a distinction between the two that bears interrogating. And first, let's talk about difficulty. What makes a game difficult? I think there's a few broadly accepted ways that games are difficult, oftentimes with modes that you select, but not always. HP that you have, that enemies have. Damage done, damage dealt. This is especially true for, say, RPGs, action-adventure, where combat is a primary mode. Other games types, difficulty can be, say, you have less time before a racing game, stuff is more expensive to buy and build, and so forth. But it seems to be resource management is at the heart of stuff. Is you have more or less, and that removes avenues and abilities to make mistakes. Would that be a general catch-all description, do you think?
I think it's pretty close. I don't know if it's always necessarily about resource management, but the way I conceive of this is that the more difficult a game is, the more obstacles are thrown in your way that require you to execute properly, with smaller and smaller windows in which you are able to mess up. Which can definitely be done by increasing the HP of bosses and the damage that you take, but it could also be, say, in a platforming game, in one mode you might have a couple of platforms that you have to climb up. Difficulty level increases, you put spikes on those platforms. Now you have to deal with that. In a Fire Emblem game, for instance, you can have the same map, but have some extra reinforcements here and there. That's an additional obstacle. Or introduce something like Fog of War. These are things that don't necessarily change the resources that you have, but they do offer additional challenge.
Or for games like in Fire Emblem, where reinforcements for the enemy come and attack on the same turn. I think that's kind of cheap.
Yeah, I don't remember that happening that much in Fire Emblem Path of Radiance, at least not in a way that actually bothers you, because they typically spawn far away. But in other ones, that definitely happens, unless you have encountered an example.
Well, it's in Three Houses.
Well.
But why do you want higher difficulty levels? Why would you play on them?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot, and First, I think we need to very briefly discuss different reasons why one would play a game, because the reason why you're playing a game and the mindset that you bring to it will change whether or not an increase in difficulty increases your enjoyment of the game, right? So if you just want to like sit back on the couch and get drunk and plow through something mindlessly, you want an easier time. But if you're sitting there and you want to really engage with the game more, what an increased difficulty does is it forces you to engage with the systems that the game presents you as solutions to their problems in a deeper way.
Yes. And it's what you want to get out of the game that determines it. But something that happens all too often in certain types of higher difficulty settings, it goes from more difficult into frustrating.
Yeah. And I want to get your take on that because obviously frustration is something that is subjective.
Yes.
Everybody has their own thresholds. And you play games on a very high difficulty level. You're playing Trails in the Sky the Third on Nightmare right now. But I also know that having played through a couple of chapters in Fire Emblem, Path of Radiance, you texted me at like 10 a.m. All right, that's enough Fire Emblem Path of Radiance for me today. I'm done. So what triggers frustration for you?
I think familiarity or lack thereof with the systems in question. Trails the Third, it's our third entry into the series. So we know what a quartz is and how to use, abuse, and not game, but make the system work. So there's got to get CP, elemental weaknesses, buff, debuff as necessary. It's a great big chess match. You got to find the right moves, or it's a dance. You have to find the right pattern with you and the partner. What I found about Fire Emblem is the stuff I could not control. A lucky crit, or an unlucky miss, or a unit I didn't know about coming and killing my healer, for example, or what say you. It felt cheap. It felt like this was not earned, either by a mistake on my part or a good move on the opponent's part.
This brings up something that I've been thinking about for a while. So if you look back at very retro games, like on the NES, what those games tend to be are short games that are difficult, but once you learn the game, you can get through it pretty quickly. So, for example, there are people who have memorized the layouts of all of the levels of Castlevania or Ninja Gaiden. These are difficult games, but they can plow through it because they've earned that, and they've earned that by playing through it again and again and again and again and again, mastering that game specifically. And in a way, something like Path of Radiance or other classic Fire Emblem games are the same, because the maps play out not in a predetermined way, but like you can learn when reinforcements come. You can learn how you recruit specific characters or whatnot. To me, a Fire Emblem game is not something that you're going to master the first time you play it. You have to learn all of these different things, what characters are good, how you execute properly. But at the same time, is that really a way that we approach games today as modern gamers?
No, and let me tell you why in brief. I think most people do not replay games. In general, I believe, and there might be some data I do believe that attests to this fact, this speculation on my part. The games that are replayed, I believe, they tend to be games you can jump into and out of without that much losing much. Say Skyrim, for example. And, there's a lot of games that, you cannot beat. Just play and play. Say Call of Duty, multiplayer games and so forth. How many people, I wonder, have done New Game Plus on the Kiseki series? I bet it's a small fraction of those who've played it once and then they move on. We talked about in some Trails game, you need the New Game Plus to get the full story or something.
Cold Steel 2.
Okay. How many had done that? What fraction got that achievement or wonder? I bet we could look up on Steam
Oh, probably. But the answer is going to be very small. Most people just look up the cutscene on YouTube.
Yeah.
What occurs to me right now is that I think that there's more replaying of single player games than you might think, but it depends on the kind of game. People don't replay Kiseki because Kiseki is very long and very dialogue heavy. It's a great time, to play through it, but by the time that you're done, you either want to move on to the next entry or you want to play something else.
Yes.
However, games that center gameplay more than anything else, that have high amounts of variability in their gameplay, kind of lend themselves to more replays. What comes to my mind immediately is the popularity of Pokemon challenges, where people will go and play normally the first 3 or 4 or 5 generations, depending on the YouTuber, and say, all right, I'm going to play through this game with only this one Pokemon. Can I beat Pokemon Fire Red with one Alakazam or one Diglett, something like that? Or only with this type, or only this kind of Pokemon, only gift Pokemon. And people find it rewarding to play through the same game with different parameters put on them. In the same way, with a game like Fire Emblem Path of Radiance, you have a lot of different units that you can decide, okay, I'm going to use this unit instead of that unit. I'm going to try this strategy instead of that strategy. There's a plot. You can also skip that plot very easily by pressing the start button.
Yes.
And so, the game itself is built in such a way that it rewards you for completing it multiple times. It unlocks trial maps at the end. If you beat it 7 times, then you can play with different boss units in those maps. Which kind of comes back to the whole learning the game while learning the game. It's a different reward system than something like Kiseki, which, look, there's gameplay stuff to learn there. There's stuff to master, which is why playing Trails in the Sky the Third on hard has been so rewarding. I'm still not going to go back and play Trails in the Sky the Third immediately thereafter. And I am replaying these games.
Yes.
Because it's so dialogue heavy, and you cannot skip these cutscenes very easily. You have to use turbo and go all the way through. All of this is to say that if a game is designed to be replayed in that fashion, the difficulty it presents a first-time player might be higher than you expect.
You think so?
It depends on the game. Pokemon, no.
Yeah.
Fire Emblem, yes.
Yes.
And the reason why it's hard in Fire Emblem is because from the time it came to the States, and even before then, Fire Emblem is a series that says, learn me, and will punish you for you not taking it seriously. The sole exception being Three Houses, because that game is easy as shit. But, I played the original Fire Emblem in GBA, and I lost a lot of units. Somehow I managed to get to the end, but it took me a long time, and that really taught me to respect that series.
And how do you make it feel earned? This difficulty, this challenge, and not the computer fucked me over.
With something, sometimes you cannot help the, gee, that fucked me over.
Yeah.
Last night I was playing, and I was doing well on a map, and then Ike got critted, and boom, I had to redo the map. And it was the 4th time I had redone the map. But I would submit that there is something rewarding in and of itself of going on a map and losing a couple of times, even due to things that you don't remember, that can happen. And then you're like, okay, well, now I know that happened. Now let's reset and try it again. And then by the time that you nail that, there's something rewarding having realized, okay, I've learned this map. It requires a different mindset, You can't go into a map. Whenever I start a new chapter on Fire Emblem Path of Radiance, I assume I'm not going to beat it the first try. If I beat it the first try, that's amazing. But if I lose a unit, I'm resetting. If for example, I really want to get a certain chest and I can't get that chest, I will probably reset. I don't mind doing a couple of trial runs before I make the real run. But that's a different mindset.
Yes, and at least for me, I hate it when I feel I lost through no error of my own. That I didn't make a mistake. That I didn't do A when I should have done B, or vice versa. I do not like that feeling at all. When I lose in, say, Kiseki,
mm-hmm.
I generally know why. And, take a look at your streams from last week, from 2 weeks ago, I should say. Substituting Joshua for Tita was the key. The party composition was not ideal. When you did, you beat it within one, at most two attempts. You know what you were doing wrong or suboptimal, and you fixed it, and the solution was good.
Yeah, I mean, I was especially with the boss, with the arena boss. I got very frustrated, and to be honest, if I wasn't on a stream, I might have just turned the difficulty down at that point, um, because I kept throwing myself at it again and again and again, and I was getting tilted. And those who were there during that stream know how fucking pissed I got. And so I think that if you're deciding to play a game on a harder difficulty, you have to be prepared to deal with those negative emotions. And maybe that calls for a broader discussion about negative emotions in games, but I think that there's something to be said for feelings of frustration leading to greater feelings of attachment. For example, let's say you're fighting a boss in Kiseki, and Joshua comes in and saves the day. I now feel a bit more attached to Joshua because he saved my butt for that fight. Or have you ever heard of something called a Nuzlocke challenge?
No, this sounds not PG-13, so with great apprehension and concern, go ahead.
It is PG-13. It's a Pokemon challenge type in which there are basically two rules. You can only catch one Pokemon per route, normally the first one that you find, although if you already have it, you can get a different one. And if the Pokemon faints, the Pokemon dies. I've done a few of these. And invariably what happens is that at first it's like a normal run, and then the first Pokemon that you really like dies to an unlucky crit or a mistake that you made, or just whatever happens. That Pokemon's dead. And all of a sudden, that creates an attachment to to you and the rest of your team, because this is what I have to work with now. And maybe this Pokemon got me out of this scrape here, or this Pokemon we fought really well together, but then I had to sacrifice them in order to win the battle. And it feels more rewarding to get through it because the stakes are higher. By creating negative emotions, by creating grief, by creating frustration, it makes the game more satisfying.
I think my general issue I've been talking around is I want transparency with the either mechanics or playstyle. If I do something wrong, or if something happens to me that's bad, I want to know why and a very clear indicator of how to fix it. I don't want something that's essentially unpreventable, like, oh, they came and attacked on the same tune. There's nothing that you could have done to prepare or take precautions. And that's not me saying I want to do it all in the first run. You fight against a boss, you lose, you dissect what did I do right, what do I need to change or to fix, and that is itself quite fun to surmount that challenge. I don't like the curveball from nowhere.
Sure, I hear you. However, I do. You didn't bring this up right now, but you brought it up before, where like an unlucky crit then kills one of your units, and then what do I do? And sometimes that feels really bad, and it normally makes me reset. But I just finished a map before we started recording, chapter 14 or 15, where the boss had a killer axe. And what a killer axe does is it greatly increases your crit rate. So we had like a 39% chance to crit, which is, still less than 50%, but very significant. And, he has a lot of health, and so you have to figure out a way to kill him without getting anybody else killed. And what that comes down to is you then realize, okay, I have to bring in all of my ranged units here, there, and everywhere to get pot shots down at him, and then I can take him out with a sword user that'll do that pretty much guaranteed. And it is because you recognize that there is an increased chance of you losing a unit to this guy because of the increased crit chance, it makes you strategize more. And that would only exist if randomness was a factor.
Yes, and I'm not saying I don't like the, hit chance, crit chance, and so forth. A 90% chance to hit is not 100. You will not hit one time every 10 times every 100. And I guess to just sum up my thoughts, I like, and that is transparent. And I said I like transparency. Just something about it annoys me, and I don't think I have anything more intellectual than that. When I lose playing Kaseki, it feels more earned, just, than when I lose Path of Radiance. I don't know. Maybe that's irrational.
Well, I think I think there's an added element that makes this make sense. With Kiseki, when you lose, you just hit the retry and you're back into that fight. There's not a long-term investment that you've now lost.
No.
With Path of Radiance, there is. And this brings us to another topic that we had said that we wanted to talk about, which is not just difficulties in combat, although Fire Emblem is a lot of combat. But Kevin, in the first couple of chapters that you've played, you've had to make some difficult choices about when to reset and when not to reset, who to sacrifice and who not to sacrifice. So why don't you tell us a bit about your experience with that?
It's a new facet for me of it's not I lost a unit, I'll just DP a turn or two. It's I lost a unit, that's not Ike. What do I do now? And generally,
And for, by the way, for those that aren't aware, with Fire Emblem, especially in Path of Radiance, there is no casual mode. If you lose a unit, they are dead unless you restart the whole chapter. Divine Pulse in the newer games lets you turn back time to prevent that. That's what DP stands for, not something else. But that does not exist in Path of Radiance. If a unit dies, you have two choices: keep going or reset.
I actually hate classic mode for story reasons.
Okay? Do you want to elaborate?
Yes, I was waiting for you to ask. Okay, so any unit that's not required can die. And so when writing the story, the developers, writers, they cannot know this unit will be here. It can have this impact on the narrative, this dialogue. So whatever, it can only be transient, ephemeral. It can't really affect the plot, character development, because you could have lost it at the map that you got it. And so there's a weightlessness to a lot of characters' interactions where it feels insubstantial because it cannot be substantial.
I mean, definitely Fire Emblem Three Houses being an exception. They don't have the strongest characters all of the time, but I would say that I don't think it is because of the permadeath factor, because there are some characters where if they die, they actually survive and continue to play a role in the narrative. In Path of Radiance, Titania is one of them, and Soren is the other, because they are integral to Ike's story. So if they die, they'll just be wounded and won't be able to return to combat.
Okay, cool. So, that tangent done. Chapter 2 or 3, I lost Reese the healer very close to the end. I'm like, fuck it, I'm not going to replay. And Colin was a bit incredulous, saying how good a healer he was. And then a couple chapters later, I lost Soren and Axe Dude on a map. Boyd.
Yeah, you've lost two of the best units in that chapter.
And I just thought, well, I told Colin that. He's like, oh my god, it was so great. I thought, fuck it, I'm just going to restart, take a break, and then after a couple days, I got through it. And then, yeah, I don't know.
No, it does definitely require a different mindset, because you can't just be thinking about that map. You have to be thinking about the entirety of your playthrough.
Correct.
Which is one of the things that I find so rewarding about Fire Emblem, but it does make it difficult. I've basically just come down to the decision that if I lose a unit, I reset the chapter, period. On the Super Nintendo, when I was playing Genealogy of the Holy War, there is no way to reset the game just from the controller. You have to stand up and do it physically. And it was like Catholic Mass for me, just constantly getting up and down, reset, down, up, reset, down. Something that we also wanted to talk on a little bit are ways outside of combat that a game can be difficult. And I haven't talked about this game in a while, but it always seems to come up with these discussions, and that is Tales of Arise. Because I'm serious, I know you're smirking at me, but when it comes to resource management, this is a pretty, I would say, a classic case at this point, where the game provides you with just enough money to get just enough items to get by. And what that means is when you're fighting, or even when you're not fighting, when you're going around and exploring, you have to be very judicious with your item use because you know how valuable that is. And it does lead to a different dimension in how you think about it. It's not just how do I get through this fight. It's how do I get through this dungeon so I can get back to town with enough resources to get new equipment and then continue on. I will ignore the fact that the game sells for real money, the solution to that problem, which I think is one of the worst things that you can do in game design. But as it is, it's an interesting way to increase the difficulty of the game without making bosses and stuff like that damage sponges.
What other ways can we do it? More expensive items that maybe less available places to heal to find vendors. Skill checks, where the threshold, say, for an RPG like New Vegas, is higher or lower depending on the difficulty. And a lot of these are quantitative based. You get more money or less money. More items, less items. You need bigger or smaller numbers that are more difficult to obtain. What about qualitative?
I'll talk about qualitative in a second, but I want to ask you some questions about Fallout New Vegas because at least on the sounds of it, what it sounds like to me is this is a game where you walk around and you explore, right? And it's open world, so you can come back to different stuff.
Yes.
Maybe with different dialogue options, it means that you'll be locked out of more stuff if you're playing on higher difficulty levels. But what's to stop you from just grinding out a skill? Or couldn't you make the case that all that this is doing by increasing the skill cap or the skill check for a certain thing is preventing the player from seeing more of the game unless they decide to come back later?
I think could definitely make that argument. And that touches at a very central tenet we've been talking around, but never pulling from the shadows and forcing it to stand under the cold, harsh light of day, of truth, of justice.
The fuck are you talking about?
What does a game owe the player?
I think I see the Google Doc, so I think that we disagree on this.
Not, or you owe the ability to beat a game because you bought it. What in general does a game owe a player through the implicit contract?
Right. To me, a game owes the player the chance to beat it. It should not be a game that is literally impossible to finish due to a glitch or poor design. However, a game offers the player the experience, and it's up to the player to have that experience. In the same way that you can go to a bookstore and buy a book, and there are some books that are easier to read, and there are some books that are harder to read. Just because you buy War and Peace by Tolstoy doesn't mean that you are owed that you will finish that book. That is up to you to decide to sit there and work through it. And the same is true for video games.
It's a very interesting way of putting it, because earlier I would have strenuously disagreed on the grounds that I bought the game, like say Elden Ring not having a pause button impacts the playability and so forth, and you are owed the ability to beat it, easier than what you have said. But if we take the position that video games are art, and I think that both of us do, the accessibility of art is an important question to grapple with.
See, people bring up accessibility when we talk about difficulty all of the time. And I think that people are using the term wrongly. Now, people on our Twitter might disagree with me, and I welcome your feedback on this, but to me, we're conflating two different uses of the word accessibility. There is accessibility in terms of you have a disability and you need a special setting in order to access the game on a level playing field. For example, somebody can be colorblind. Games will commonly use color to indicate different status effects or items that you can interact with. Having a colorblind mode in order to help players with that condition play the game normally is perfectly, that we should want more and more of that in our video games. Same with things like the ability to increase the size of text for people that have poor vision. I'm looking at you, Kevin, right here, right there. I've literally seen you put your phone straight up to your face so that you can read the text.
And you know the font size on my e-readers.
Yeah, it's huge. Like, my God. That is pretty big. That's what she said. Anyway, what it doesn't mean is that every game, and this is my opinion, that's accessibility in terms of helping people access it normally. There's also the use of the word accessible to mean easy and not threatening. So for that reason, you can describe Pokemon or Super Mario RPG as an accessible first RPG because it's light, it's charming, it's not overly difficult. It allows you to break into the genre. It allows you to break into that game. However, that is only a feature if there are other games that are not as accessible, because then you can access the genre by playing these easier games and then build up your skill to enjoy other harder games of that genre. And therefore, while I do agree that all games should have more and more accessibility options when it comes to dealing with disability, it does not mean that all games should be able to be dumbed down to the point where everybody can beat them. And I say this as somebody who gets tilted at Dark Souls and will never beat a Dark Souls game, or has never beaten a Ninja Gaiden game. I just accept the fact that I'm probably not going to beat them.
So the accessibility, or when we say that certain books, novels, or films, cinema are relatively inaccessible, you get something greater engaging with it, or you need more to engage with it on a level playing field, and the output is correspondingly greater.
Yeah.
But for, say, inaccessible games, I think we need to distinguish something where similar types of games that you get more having engaged with it, and the inaccessible games where it's just frustrating without this, I'm not sure what you would call it, engagement, or what say you, if you take my meaning.
I don't. Please expand.
If War and Peace was, you first had to, like, if every word was anagrammed, that would be less accessible, more frustrating without giving you something corresponding before you can read it. The accessibility comes from the text itself, not how the text
Yeah.
is presented, to use what may be a bad metaphor, anagram.
To make it more real, look at Finnegan's Wake. Finnegan's Wake is gobbledygook. Nothing about that book is inaccessible in the fact that anybody with eyes can read it, but it's hard to make meaning out of it.
It was designed that way. It's not like...
It was designed that way.
Yeah. And games that are designed to be, quote, maybe not inaccessible is a bad term, but I'm not sure what a good one would be, to reward the engagement, like, say, Dark Souls. It's different than a game that has, this unit showed up and critted you. You could not have prevented that. The engagement is different. Do you take my meaning there?
No, there's a difference between designed to be difficult and shitty game design.
Yeah. You know, certain features, quality of life features, should be mandatory.
Like what?
Pause.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I could see an argument that not having a pause button forces you to, like, be more engaged with the game, but you can't always control when the pizza guy comes, and somebody's got to answer the door.
Yeah, games should not be designed for the college student with infinite free time.
Right.
What if you're playing a game on work hours? I would never do my...
You would never do that.
Or something like that. Life gets in the way, and life will get more in the way the older one gets.
So, speaking of this distinction between really difficult games, some people think that they should all have easy modes in order to increase accessibility. It seems like we both actually agree that this is not actually necessary. What do we think about games that have a certain level of easiness or let's say standardness, that like the core experience is easy enough that everybody can engage with and have a good time, but there are added additional challenging things that only like those who really put in the time and effort can get through.
Do you mean like say a easy/story mode where the gameplay is not an impediment to getting the story?
No, though we should talk about that as well. But what I really mean is a game with one difficulty level and the main story and most of the side quests are, pretty decent. But then there's like some really super secret special extra bosses that are really fucking hard. Or say in a game like Blue Fire, which is a platformer type of game, most of the game is relatively fine, but then you have specific challenges, and some of them go really hardcore in terms of demanding platforming skill from the player. And then it's up to you to decide if you want to engage with that or not.
Well, for one, I hate super secret stuff. To me, immersion is broken if I have to go to a guide or enlist outside assistance to play a game.
Okay, so let's even say that the game tells you where it is.
Okay.
I don't. We're not caring about it being secret right now. We're caring about it being a magnitude of difficulty above the rest of the game.
I'm fine with that in general. It should be bonus type stuff. You should not have your understanding or engagement or enjoyment with the narrative core themes be contingent on it. It should not be a lesser experience skipping it, not doing it.
What do you think a good reward for that is? Do you think there should be a reward?
I think it should be equipment, money. It should be gameplay focused. Not as a blanket rule, but as a general axiom, I would say no special cutscene or plot dimension, character support. What say you?
I think I disagree with you. And I'm just thinking about this now. Something that I've always found weird is when you're playing through a game and you beat the super extra hard final boss or whatever, and then it gives you the strongest equipment in the game, which is great, but you've already beaten the game. Or you've beaten the stuff that you would need that equipment to fight. So what's the point of having that? Whereas if you're rewarded with an extra bit of story, I mean, that seems like, yeah, it might be more and more required for completion, though it already would be, but then you're rewarded for going that extra mile.
Like, what is it for Cold Steel 2, New Game Plus? What does it give you? Is it just story?
Yeah, so Cold Steel Plus, Cold Steel 2 New Game Plus contains some items that, basically an additional book set that you have to find throughout the game. And then if you collect them, it reveals a very important part of the backstory of Zemuria that Cold Steels 3 and 4 assume that you know already.
Okay, so it's...
And it's not that, and that's not tied behind like a super hard boss or anything. That is literally tied behind you playing the game again.
It's just so weird.
It is a really stupid design choice.
And how did people find that out, I wonder, when it just came out?
No clue. Data mining, maybe.
But what about story mode?
Yeah, I'm about to ask. You had brought that up. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I completely agree, because I think it makes the games...
You agree with what? I never said my thoughts about it. So what do you agree with?
Well, story modes are wonderful. Games should be accessible to all populations. Say working parents, those who are busy. I, for the most part, go to games for story, and I want to have the option to not be impeded through my engagement with the story through grinding to be quite pejorative. If I have the time that's limited and I want to do this game, I want to be able to do the game on my terms. Understanding I am giving up something in the process of the gameplay. But I go into that eyes open, making that bargain. So I cannot go back and then gainsay the developers and say you broke this compact.
See, I have no problem with their existence or their inclusion. I have never once played a game on story mode, at least not since I was 8. And back then they didn't really exist. I just played games on easy out of happenstance, but now I mostly play on normal, at times on hard. I've never once thought that a game needed it, and I've never once thought that a game should be detracted for not having it. If a developer decides that they want it, that's up to the developer. But if a developer decides that they don't want to put in a story mode or they don't want to put it in easy mode and they've designed this experience for the gamer to experience in that way, I am more than happy to let them do that.
I mean, it's all about preferences and what, it should be. If they should be free to do so. I think it's a mistake to not include an easy/story mode. Because people should be able, I think, to play these games on the terms that are available to them. If I'm 45, have 2 kids, I'm gonna want a story mode, and I would be angry, annoyed at least, if a game I wanted to play required more of an investment than I was able to give.
Maybe I'm a bit of a curmudgeon, and I'm not 45 with 2 kids, so I definitely, my opinion could change, though you're not 45 or nor have 2 kids either, although you do have 2 cats that are basically your children.
Yes.
And Clara is mine, obviously, but I don't see it that way. To me, I've been having trouble playing games lately. I played Fire Emblem Path of Radiance last night and this morning, and it's the most non-Trails video game I've played in the past week. Mostly because I had to stream, but then I had other shit going on too. And in no way do I think that game should have a story mode. Part of the joy of that game is overcoming the challenge. And so I don't think that games should always be flexible in order to suit my whims or suit my schedule. I have my schedule. I have my life. It's up to me to decide the content that I want to consume.
Yes.
And I know that you're going to say those modes help you do that.
Yes.
All it will do is increase the amount of games that you're able to decide to play if you have limited time. But to me, I think that we're forgetting that with each additional mode that a game brings incurs a vast amount of balancing that game developers have to do, which means increased dev time costs. It also means that there's that much more increase in the amount of bugs that have to be squashed. And I'm not sure that the amount of time and money that is put into a game to create that mode is necessary.
Let me break my argument a tiny bit. Let me bring in some counters against it.
Okay.
We generally would not expect the same of literature, of drama,
No.
of movies. 1,000-page classic novel, make the time. If you can't, then go read something else that fits your availabilities.
I mean, there are abridged versions or things like No Fear Shakespeare, but
the fact
you should read those.
The fact that I am opposed to them, but not for games, does that belie my statement that I think games are or should be art?
No, I don't think that it changes that specific statement. I think that in your conception, there are multiple ways to approach a game, and that we can say about readers reading books that every reader brings their own perspective to a book and therefore comes off with their own experience. I think with you see the potential for games to have multivalent experiences in the same package. A book cannot change what it is depending on the whims of the reader. You have the book and that's it. With games, it is possible to change these variables.
Audiobooks.
I mean, that's just changing the medium, but it's still the same words, unless the reader is screwing it up. But in general, you have the book and that is it. If there is an abridged version or there is some kind of crib, that's a separate product. Whereas with a video game, you do have the ability to change these variables. So I think to you're saying since that is part of the medium itself, you should want more of that.
We conceptualize as a given. Games are more of a interaction between multiple parties, Whereas a film or cinema, the product stands alone, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And precisely because of this, I don't think that games necessarily have to have different modes, because I think that there are some experiences that a developer wants you to have, and that's what you should experience. And again, I say this as somebody who will probably not experience this, because I don't play Dark Souls because of its difficulty and the fact that it requires you to quote unquote get good. Not something that I really want to get into, at least in that particular method. But I also recognize that series like that fulfill a very specific niche and fill a need that a lot of players have, and it's a specific vision that the developers wanted to craft. And therefore, I think they should be allowed to do that without having to deal with this every game needs an easy mode discourse every time a new game comes out.
Yeah. I don't know, it's a very complex topic. My mind on some instances has been changed a couple of times just talking about it. I don't know if there's what ground level stuff I, have believed. It all feels very aporetic, as Plato would have us end.
Nah. Now we have just empty brains and just vibes, as Plato would want us to have.
It talks about the relationship, what is and what should be between artist and consumer or experiencer of art. I don't know.
Repeat the question.
The relationship, what is and what should be the relationship between the artist, the art, and someone who experiences the art. It's tough.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to vary, right? And let's not forget, I mean, we tend to treat video games as art objects on this podcast, right? Which means that we don't take into account the fact that they're also economic objects. Yes, all of those games behind me, I have bought with cold hard cash. Also, I've pirated games and stuff like my EverDrive and whatnot. But once you buy the game, that's it. Like, you own that game, you have the ability to have this experience whenever you'd like. And so, like, we are approaching a game as just for that, just for the experience, not really taking money into account. That being said, I can totally see the argument of you are working very hard, low income job, you finally scrounge up enough money, you've heard great things about Elden Ring, so you go and you drop your $60-$70 on Elden Ring, and then you play it and you realize, oh, I've wasted my money because I'm not enjoying this and it is too difficult for me and there's no way to turn down the difficulty. I don't have the time to get good. I can see why that would bite people, why that would make them angry and want to have the flexibility of an easy mode. I do understand that. Just to me, I don't think that should dictate the decisions that developers make.
Counter, most books and movies are not $60, $70.
No. I mean, most books you can get anywhere from $1 to $20 on an e-reader. You go to Barnes & Noble, most of the time the softcover books were $8, like fantasy novels were $8 when I was growing up. I think they're more like 11, 12 now. But still, it's not a big investment.
And I wonder the material components, how much should they? Or is it going in? This was not hidden and accept the cost of a book, of a movie, of a game, and make your peace.
Why is it that we are okay with spending $24 at a movie theater to watch a really bad movie, like Black Adam, for instance, and we don't feel like we need to get our money back for 2 hours wasted? But if we spend $60 on a game that we don't like, that might provide us with 40 hours of disappointment and or entertainment. It's a different story.
Refund for movies, no one does it. Refund?
No, nobody does it.
For games, Steam within 2 hours, I think, 90 minutes.
I mean, that's for digital. For physical, sometimes you can, it depends on where you buy it from, but you can also like trade in a physical game for, especially when it's new, up to 75% of its normal value.
I'm just going to spitball here. I think because we see this much more from a consumerist, product-oriented method, that if this product was not to our expectations, we feel justified in getting our recompense. The way we were sending a meal back or something. I think and that speaks to hidden or underlying assumptions about what we commonly think of as games, what they are, and what they should be, if that makes sense. It's
I see where you're coming from. Like with a movie, we buy a ticket to go see that movie. The quality of the movie, therefore, is irrelevant. We bought the opportunity to watch it. If we liked it or not, that doesn't matter. We bought the opportunity to see it. What we're doing when we buy a game is buying the opportunity to play it. But we don't think about it that way.
No, we think of it as buying a particular type of experience more than
Right.
the experience itself. How much though is the cost? If games were $8 to $10, would we feel the same?
I mean, it probably would feel different. There are games that are not that good. That means that they are worth $20, that they are not worth $60. And so then you wait for games to go on sale, or you find a good deal, or you just decide, screw it, I'm going to buy it at this price anyway.
Yeah, I mean, at least for me, I've bought novels, especially some light novels, say Dan Matchy, Mahuka, Overlord, where I'm like, I did not finish. This was not great. I spent $6 on them, so I'm gonna eat it.
Right. All right. Well, I mean, I think that we've kind of beaten this topic into the ground. Difficulty is a very complex topic, and it turns out that it relates more to other media than we might have thought of.
It is. And I think it should be easier to beat this topic into the ground. You should be given shovels and the like.
Well, don't worry. I'm sure we'll beat it into the ground some other time when we come up with a sidebar episode and forget that we've done this before, like we almost did the other time.
Until we repeat ourselves from senility and old age. I'm Kevin, that's Colin. And until we repeat ourselves from senility and old age. Oh, wait. I'm Kevin, that's Colin. See you next time.
Thanks, everybody, for listening. Bye-bye.